Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome to another edition of Tech Interviews. So, on this week's show, we're going to be taking a look at a topic that I think is a topic we hear talked about a lot, but not something we've particularly delved into on the show before, and that's the idea of business transformation. You know, we talk a lot about technology and technology change and technology evolution, but what does that mean on a wider business perspective? So it's an interesting topic and something that I'm keen to discuss. But what I definitely needed was somebody who was an expert in that field. So I found one of those. Chris Gherardini. Chris, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you today, Paul?
Yeah, real good, Chris. Thank you, and thanks for coming on Tech Interviews. So, as we always do, before we jump into our topic, why don't you introduce yourself, Chris? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Sure. Thank you. So I am the president and owner of a company called Turnkey Technologies. We're based here in the middle of the United States in Missouri. So I'm a technical owner. So computer science, math. Grew up in a public accounting firm for 9 years. So the story is I married accounting and technology. So fast forward, I formed Turnkey 27 years ago, and we are a Microsoft Dynamics partner servicing the United States, and we install and implement and license ERP software and CRM software. So it's the best way to
So,
describe it.
yeah, that's a pretty good way to describe it. I think everybody knows. Everybody now knows what you do. So which is good. And actually, Chris, before we delve in, if you want to move to the side a little bit, do you want to show off your kids' Lego
we've
that's
got
been built?
we've got Hogwarts sitting in the background here. It's a
Yeah,
6,000 piece collection. I had to move from the residence to here so it didn't get destroyed. So
yeah. So we had a great chat about that. Before we started recording. So yeah, if when Chris shares contact details towards the end, if you want to ask him about Lego, he's your man. Well, more to the point, his kid is the
kids are
man
about
man
Lego.
to go to. Yeah. So well, Chris, let's I said in the introduction that we're going to talk about this kind of idea of business transformation. And I said it's not something I talk about particularly. I'm much more kind of data and technology focused. So for those who are listening to the show who are probably in a similar boat to me, do you want to set some boundaries around what we mean when we talk about business transformation? What does that encompass? What do we mean?
Sure. So typically we think about business transformation or digital transformation. There's four pillars that you'll see in most of the illustrations. We want to impact operations. We want to innovate, transform products. We want to change the customer's experience. We want to change the employee's experience and impact them. So there's really four different potential impacts of any type of digital transformation. And as we talk, it's not necessarily a big bang. It's an incremental process where we have a vision of a better way, right? And we solicit information and input and try to rationalize and even ROI. What's the impact of this change and who's it impacting? Is it a customer, employee, operations? And again, once decisions are made, you execute, you complete it, and what's next on the list? And so there's an iterative process of transforming in any of those different areas.
So one thing that you talked about there, and we did kind of chat about this before we started recording, um, because I suppose my view, and I said to you earlier on, my view around transformation is it is this kind of big bang approach, and you kind of just touched on there in your introduction that actually it can be a lot more iterative than that. So is this something that when we talk about transformation, because I always get the feeling that one of the things that maybe puts people off that first step is they see this as this massive process to go through. So is it something that you can kind of target? A department, or you could target an individual almost. Can it be that granular?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it could be so simple that, hey, I want my customers to be able to go to a website and place an order with my company. And you may not have a business to business website experience. That's a perfect example where you want to change your customer's experience. And it's pretty narrow, but there's a perfect example. Maybe it's, hey, I want my employee to have an app on their phone so they can do their expense report. There's another example of a very low impact, but very specific transformation. You're changing an employee's experience, but you're also impacting the back office by creating a more efficient process. So that transformation impacts the employee and it impacts operations. So that's another example of just a very narrow one. You mentioned data and analytics, Power BI. Everybody loves Power BI. I'm going to give my vendor a Power BI report that shows him his shipping performance so he can self-improve. There's another example of I'm transforming by extending information in a secure manner out to one of my partners so that he sees what he needs to make his job better. And again, now he's impacting my operation because I'm getting better delivery schedules. Those are all just diverse examples. So
Yeah, we'll come back to that because I think something else you've just said in there, kind of in the back of my mind. Yeah, I think whenever we talk about this kind of innovation and change inside of an organization, whether it's technical or whether it's process driven, I think there's always a piece in there about cultural shift as well. So I'll kind of tee that question up for a little bit later
Absolutely.
on, but maybe have a look at that. So, we hear this phrase transformation all the time. With business transformation, you touched on digital transformation. I think that's a very popular phrase in our industry right now. So what's your view on what's driving this need to transform? What is it that's driving organizations of all kinds of shapes and sizes to want to transform and change? What are some of the drivers that you're seeing?
Well, part of it, I mean, there's different pressures, and I think on organizations to change, and part of it's just technology has fast forwarded where people have different expectations. And if we talk about workers, workers have an expectation. They live in an app world, and they're like, well, why doesn't my company have apps, for example? So even my organization, my team is innovating, and they want to change how customers do support, and they're like, let's build a turnkey app. There it is. There's a perfect example where, and what's driving that? Well, there's pressure internally from the employees having expectations, but moreover, even customers have expectations. It's a digital world, and again, mindsets have shifted, so that's part of it. And companies that are flat-footed and they aren't moving, they're becoming less relevant. So there's a pressure to stay relevant, and but that's a perfect example of what drives it. It could be customer, it could be employee, it could just be an operational inefficiency that, hey, we can recapture that revenue. Let's focus on solving that problem. And they're all examples of transforming. So
Yeah, and so I mean, one of the things it never takes long in this show, of course, to start discussing the impact of COVID. It's no good trying to hide from it. It's impacted many of us, and is continuing to do just right now. So, but have you seen a change, either accelerating transformation demands from companies, or even changing the way they see transformation? Are there other organisations you're working with, for example, who maybe had one view of what their next kind of iteration might look like, and that's been changed significantly by kind of the last 12 months? What's your view?
I would agree completely. COVID has impacted our business where we went from an in-person workforce of 60 people to everybody's remote now. And I think as we feel our customers, they are accelerating their embracing and embarking on these upgrades and these investments in their technology because of their workforces. And again, it's a whole new game a year later in terms of how you manage your workforce. Traditional manufacturers, people still show up at the factory, but there's so many other people that are working from anywhere at this point in time. And they're absolutely an acceleration. It started with collaboration platforms, teams, and just other ones that are out there where we're using those things just to get together and to communicate. But even the business transaction side, people are investing in their companies to be ready to take advantage of the market, even coming back in full force is an expectation. So
And have you seen the last 12 months? I mean, has it complicated what organisations want from transformation, or as because we talked before, didn't we, about the idea that we can be relatively granular in the way that we look at transformation? Are you seeing a change in scope and things where people are now looking at it and saying, actually, I had this idea of we wanted an expenses app, but actually the last 12 months has suddenly widened the scope massively. Is that relatively common as well?
it is. They're more aggressive in terms of looking at the future, and I think organizationally, people are bullish. I don't think that we're as executive leaders, we're optimistic about what the future holds, and even in terms of the workforce. So I think there's a proactive nature to doing that and to deploying this technology to be ready for the opportunities showing up as well. So
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And you talked about some of the transformational drivers earlier on around, whether they could be customer driven or they could be internally driven. Is that a start to as you look at business transformation? Is that a good starting point? Is to look at these things as opportunities, not as something where it's very heavy on your shoulders and there's a big sigh that comes before it going. Everybody, the board keeps saying we need to transform, so we're going to have to transform. Is it much more? It is part of doing this well, seeing it as an opportunity and seizing it as such.
I would agree. I think it's tactical. I mean, you're not going to go fix things that don't add value to the organization or don't impact your customers or workers. So, even in that exercise where we identify things that we think could fix, we still want to rationalize the ROI on those and prioritize based on that. And again, as I said, it's not big bang, and I think that's a misnomer that people think, oh, it's too big, it's daunting, I can't even start it. It's not true. You can attack this thing in pieces, and even if you're current technology is limiting, you can still work around that until you take on that bigger project of maybe upgrading the core system, the ERP, the hub of the wheel there. But But like I said, I don't think there's any reason to be afraid to begin the conversation, identify low hanging fruit, and that's typically what companies do. Where do we fix first? What's the most important thing? And a lot of times it's take care of the customer. So a lot of times there's customer centric and again employee centric things that are up at the priorities. So
So, well, let's start talking about kind of the transformation process a little bit then, because I suppose one thing that's always interesting to me when we do shows like this is to look at giving people some things to try and avoid initially. So, obviously you talked about your kind of 27 years as turnkey, plus background before that. So obviously in that time, you've got lots of great, really positive experiences of transformation under your belt. But I guess there's some stinkers in there somewhere as well. Not run by you, obviously. That's not what I meant. But where is the things that you see when people start along this process, where they're making mistakes from day one? Is there things that you would suggest people try and avoid? Maybe one of those things being don't bite, don't try and boil the ocean and bite off more than you can chew. But is there things that you would absolutely advocate for people to try and avoid as they start these type projects?
well, you nailed the big one. The boil the ocean is never a good approach, but I think that even the mechanisms to identify target opportunities, and opportunities is the correct word. So if the executive leadership and leadership has to be involved, but you've also got people down in the ranks that are going to identify room for opportunity. How can we make it better for again employees, customers? We can do this with our products, or we need to change this. But it's making a list of potential topics that, and then even to the point where, well, how do we visualize what that outcome can lead us to? And so creating vision, because right, a lot of people, I can't see through, I've never seen it. How do I know what it looks like? So vision creation is a big part of our process. And being from Missouri, that show me thing, we absolutely like to show you. But visioning is where it starts. And you may say, once we vision, we're like, that's not what I imagine. And sometimes the imagination and the imagineering, as you call it, is very important. But it's visioning, and you start there, and there's a list, and then there's a little more. Let's get a little more substantive, right? Tactical, where, well, who's got point of view? Who's the subject matter expert? May not be inside the building. I always joke about I'm in the box. I have to leave the box to bring things back to the box. That's what I tell you. Bring in an expert. Bring in somebody that's got a point of view on your industry. And when we talk about visioning, it's what are the other guys doing? Sometimes you see something that it's a vision, right? I saw something, and that's where it begins, is with a vision. Okay, now how do we extend that? Grab a subject matter expert. So you need to have the right expertise. And so part of it, these are just the basic building blocks. We come up with a list. We're visualizing these things. We need a vision of what this can look like. What's it look like to have a customer portal, for example? And then we've got subject matter experts. We need real experts to come in and weigh in on us. We can't do it sometimes internally because we don't have those experiences to contribute. Stepping past that, ROI, we have to do our due diligence. How will this impact the business or the customer or the employee? Is the employee going to be more productive? Well, what's that worth? Is the customer going to order more? What's that worth? Are we going to streamline this in the organization? Well, what's that worth? Same thing. I'm sorting. I got, oh, wow, this is worth $500,000 a year in savings. This one's $25. Well, the $25 one can wait. It may be cosmetic, but we're certainly focused on the big impact components as well. Those disciplines, and again, we execute, we come back and measure. How did we do? Did we accomplish all those things we onset? So those are some of those steps. And I think that to have the discipline to really define the list, to go through visioning, to get expertise to weigh in and give you that perspective on, well, what's happening in the industry? And a lot of times people are just out of date, right? That's it, because we're in the box. They're not, you hire somebody, they come in, they may bring a fresh idea. A lot of times it doesn't always work like that. So, but those are some of those mechanics of digital transformation or any transformation that keep you from getting off the path. You're really trying to validate it. You're not saying, I think we'll make $1 million by doing this. You go spend the money, and at the end of the day, you're like, oh, it didn't work. Why? We did not do our disciplines to really make sure that we visioned it. We had experts. We substantiated the return on it. And when we finished it, we came back and measured to say, yep, we accomplished what we set out for. So it's all about discipline and execution. That'll keep people focused on what's going to really make that difference, right? We don't want to do stuff just to be doing stuff that really doesn't move the needle.
So, I mean, there's loads of great stuff in there, and actually lots to kind of try and unpack. But there's a couple of things that really stood out for me, and we touched on this earlier on actually, and I said I'd kind of come back to it, and it seems like the perfect opportunity to do so was this idea of talking about cultural shift. And I talked to lots of organisations about developing data strategy, so thinking differently about the way they look at data, and one of the big parts of that discipline is this idea. It's two things actually. One is to get buy-in at the beginning. Get organizational support from key decision makers at the top to people who are hands-on, feet on the street kind of folk at the bottom of the organization. I never really like using that phrase. I just can't think of another one. But so getting people to kind of buy in and support that. How and then there comes with that kind of a cultural shift as well, because when you're making these kind of changes, people have to understand that this is going to impact lots of things that that idea that, oh, well, we've always done it this way. Well, in the future, we might not do it this way. And if people aren't bought into that kind of idea, often that gives them an opportunity to kind of resist that change. So I mean, how important do you see in terms of business transformation, that idea of buy-in through an organization, as well as this idea of making sure that people understand there will be a cultural shift so that you're taking people along with you.
Yeah, change management is tricky. And I mean, it really starts with executive sponsorship, meaning it all comes downhill. So, you start with that premise is, do I have the executive sponsorship, the commitment from ownership, leadership to change? Great. That's the first thing we have to have. That'll help a long way with adoption. But as you think about working the end user community and who's it going to impact, is there's techniques to bring people into that process early on to help them buy in earlier to secure adoption. You can't just show up and say, okay, here's what I decided, do it. And people will resist that. But there are techniques. And again, we go back to visioning. We go back to, do you start including them in the visioning and start getting their input in that decision process? I mean, you have to listen. And I think that those techniques are imperative in any type of change management. And if you do that on the front end, I guarantee on the backside, adoption is going to be there because they were part of the process. So that's a technique in change management. And again, ownership still has to come up with a list. We don't want to waste people's time on things that we're not going to attack. But as we pick those targets to do that type of early adoption, guarantees long-term success, because adoption is very difficult in some change, and people will plant their feet. And as you know, you're only as good as the data that's put in, and if people aren't using the system the way, the data is really compromised as well. So those are very, very good points and important to secure that. So
So, well, let's have a look at the process. So, somebody's watching us here, or listening to the show, and they're about to embark on this kind of phase of some kind of transformation. Whether that's across the whole business, whether that's across a department or a team. Have you got maybe two or three tips in things that you would advise somebody to look at right at the beginning of that process? Well, obviously we've talked about things like buy-in, and as we've just discussed. But is there some things that you would always say to somebody? So before we even get started here, these are the first two or three things that you'll want to have in place.
yeah, and I think the assessment of the current technology in place is a very important detail, because it's no different than saying, hey, I'm going to build a second story on my house and I don't have a foundation. It'll crumble. So I think that to take a step back, and that may be the bigger undertaking, is, does the technology platform in place support this incremental transformation? Or is there a big, boy, I got to get current, I'm on 15-year-old stuff, which I can't do any of this stuff I want to do anyway. So there may be a core technology limitation that has to be addressed first. If we're on a relatively recent platform, it may just be nobody ever thought about implementing additional capabilities or extending the reach beyond the organizational walls to that spot. So, but that's the first big one to hit. And again, executive buy-in. I think that's, is my platform good? Do I have my leadership behind this? What's the scope of this transformation? Are we being too ambitious? And again, moderation. I do believe that people get over ambitious. So there's a few. Those are the three that I would. Don't be over ambitious. Incremental is a much more, push plateau. As I said, let's knock it out. Let's have the success. Get the next one. People do too many things at once and they fail at all of them. I'm sure you've seen that in the past too.
Yeah, and I think I actually think that's true in kind of we obviously we're both work in the technology industry, as most of the people listening to the show will do. And I think we see that across all kinds of technology projects. That people are all the things you've talked about, say, actually don't necessarily have a clear vision. So they're not really sure where they're trying to get to. The piece you've just talked about, they're not really sure where they are at right now. So they're trying to get somewhere, but they're not sure where they're starting. So who can see how that's going to turn out? You don't know where you're going, you don't know where you're starting from.
And
Uh,
that's where the external resource shows up and creates vision. Let me show you. I can show you what I've showed other people, and you're like, wow, thank you. Because again, in the box, we don't have the vision. Somebody comes in, creates that vision. That's that industry point of view that we're referring to. But you're correct. Most companies don't. They need some guidance.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well. One of the things you talked about earlier on that I kind of wanted to pull out a little bit as well was that idea about not being afraid. Not obviously people could be listening to this show and saying, well, but both of you guys are in the IT industry and you consult for a living, so of course you're going to say bring in some external expertise. So and probably of course we are, but I think there's so much truth in that. The idea that yeah, I mean, I've just been doing some work recently where we've been looking at kind of the change in the security threat. And I think people sometimes feel that they need to know all the answers to this kind of stuff, but are almost ignoring the fact that the security space is complex and it's changing rapidly. And, people are trying to put you out of your comfort zone and get past whatever defenses you've got. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Is this very similar when we start looking at transformation, actually, because transformation is big and complex and the scope can be huge and there's so many things that you can do. That's why that don't expect to know everything. Is that the real value there?
It's true, but even you have to be careful. Some consultants would want to come in and sell you a lot, and it really depends on who you're talking to. And I think the other comment I would make is peers, peers in industry. So if you think about industry groups and what you can learn from sister companies or people that are similar to you and what they've done, and so there's a less threatening approach before you jump in and get a big consultant. So, oh, we want to, because they want to come in and attack the entire org. But again, to have some opinion of where you're trying to drive so you can control the process internally, I think that's kind of where you're leading there. Is we do want to control the process. We shouldn't be afraid to open up the conversation. But again, talking to similar companies in a similar industry or through industry groups might start breaking that ice and give you some ideas of what you might be thinking about. And again, whether you want to do a big bang and change everything, or hey, I learned something from one of my sister companies that they did. It's been very successful. You told me how that ROI'd for them. Maybe that's another way to come up with priorities to start focusing on and to stick your toe in there, right? As opposed to this daunting task that's going to take years. It doesn't take years. You can have digital change or changes that you can accomplish in a month or in a couple of months. So
Yeah, and I think actually something you just said in there as well that I think is hugely important in these kind of projects is internally control the project. Even if you're bringing in external help, talking to your peers, the idea that you own it. And it's because ultimately, I always talk to people about this idea that I always feel that when I go and talk to a company, I'm no more than a tourist. I may go in and kind of do 3 or 4 weeks with them, buy something from the gift shop on the way out, but when I leave, I leave. And the
yeah.
idea that for those organisations, they're then living with the work that we've done together. Is that how crucial is that in terms of making sure that these kind of transformations are successful?
Well, in terms of your continuity, is that what you're referring to? In terms of continuity after the consultants left
Yeah,
and the process
exactly.
is
Yeah,
over? Yeah, you need internal owners, and I mean, there's no question about part of transformation is building champions inside of your organization, so you're not dependent on those external resources. So we said control internally, project management. We didn't mention that. You absolutely need project management disciplines, but you do need those subject matter experts to develop within the organization to own those processes and those changes. You can't be dependent on an external service. I would substantiate that. So,
well,
did I
well,
answer your
well
question?
yeah, no, it does. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and so while we're talking about external services, why don't we talk about Turnkey? So, what is it that so what is it that you guys do? How are you helping organisations? You touched in your introduction about you guys obviously a Microsoft shop, so you do a lot of work with Dynamics. But it's obviously it goes beyond that. This is because this is not just a technology process. So what are you guys doing? What do you do? How are you helping companies kind of get from A to B?
Sure. And so, the the focus for turnkey, and again, about 85% of the business is replacing ERP systems, which is the hub of the finance, supply chain, production, service, and so forth. So the focus on customers, that's big change. That's not a little peripheral. I'm trying to do something here, but the ERP system changes are big change. But our process starts with really, analysis, discovery, trying to understand the business requirements, what their current state is, what their vision is, what their goals are, and then that allows us to come in and align with. And again, we're Microsoft Dynamics. We're using a lot of off the shelf product to build a solution model. We identify the gaps. Maybe gaps are integrating, but our service is really holistically understanding the business requirements and coming up with a solution model and then creating vision. It really still starts with vision and ROI, and that's all before we even start a project. So we still have to go through all the solutioning, working with leadership, management teams, and so forth, and then show them what's the future look like for them. And let me show you how your business will change and how it will transform because of new process, business process support, or now the new system will enable you to do all these things that you've wanted to do, and maybe they come in a phase 2 or phase 3. But it's that real intense analysis, discovery, requirements, visioning, solutioning to get to the point where we've identified and defined a project to come in and make. And now let's execute, where we plan and we execute the replacement of the legacy platform with the new platform, and succeed, succeed, succeed. Everybody's good. Great. What's next? What's next? And it's so again, it may be a larger piece on the front end, and then certainly if the tip of the spear for turnkey is ERP, behind the tip of the spear is customer relationship management. That's customer engagement, sales, marketing. Power BI is behind that tip of the spear. Marketing is behind that. So a lot of analytics, but really the tip is still going in and looking at those core hub replacements, and they're great projects. And again, we have relationships with those customers for many many years. But even after that, after we're done, they've built up their subject matter experts. We're kind of on call if needed. We really don't have an ongoing service relationship. We're more project centric after those initial projects. But that's really it. We're really here to help customers, and the exciting thing for us is watching them after they've gone live and watching their businesses grow, and for them to really realize those advantages of new business process automation and again a cloud based experience. So
So, there's just two things I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, actually, and the second one is just something that you've just said that I hadn't thought of. It actually that cloud-based experience. Is cloud playing a part in changing the way that organisations are starting to operate? So that in itself is leading to increased kind of transformation. Is cloud a big part of that?
it is. It's everything at this point. I mean, I'm the old school legacy on premise guy that's made my own transformation, and so I transform myself and my company. Imagine revenue streams change where you go from traditional to subscription and SaaS. But for the business community and the workforce, it's the expectation. It's always on, and I can get it from anywhere, and I don't have to be in a desk, and I don't have to be in Missouri, and I could be whatever, whatever. But that sense of freedom and just unlimited, unfettered access to applications from any device, right? From my phone, from my tablet, from my desktop. That's changed immensely. And even as business owners look at capital spend and on-prem infrastructure, I'm a perfect example. Everything's left the building. There's nothing here. Everybody's got a laptop. There's no laptops here. There's no infrastructure. So it's changed my world, even in how I manage my business. But again, I'm all cloud-based apps. But absolutely, it's driving that. And again, we talked about expectations. Expectations have come a long way. Everybody just expects always on, right? Anyway, that's a whole different
Yeah,
expectation. So.
well, something you said right at the beginning, actually, that when we talked about this kind of more granular approach to transformation, and some of that was driven by employees or customers, coming to you and saying, "I've got a smartphone and it just does stuff. I get an app on it and things just happen." Is that again, has that shifted or changed people's expectation when it comes to transformation? That actually one of the big drivers is this idea that, like you just said, people expect always on. People expect a cloud-like experience to every facet of their business now. Has that been a big change?
It has, and and the millennials are driving a lot of that too. So we got to look at the changing demographics in the workforce, where you got the old school people, and it's just expectations. They just assume, and so as you think about why it's important to engage employees, because the workforce of the future has expectations that aren't being met by a lot of people out there, and so that's absolutely creates pressure. But yeah, to that point is there's a lot of expectations that haven't been met yet, and
So,
it's a
so
good
one
problem.
last question. We kind of
Sure.
talked about this, I think, before we started recording. Was this idea? And I mentioned that I spend a lot of my time working with data. That's kind of what I do for a day job. Sadly, I can't make a living doing tech interviews, not unless I want to live in a cardboard box. So one of the things that I thought you touched on that was quite interesting was this idea of that many of these ERP systems are at the absolute hub, and under that kind of front end ERP system, there might be CRM, there might be some kind of accounting system, whatever. There's a whole bunch of things, and we talked before we recorded about this idea that increasingly customers and businesses want to be data driven. They want to use data to make better decisions. Is having a good broad kind of joined together centralized business system, can that hugely change how accessible that information is? Because I think one of the things we see is that people are trying to pull all these different portions of information or data together to try and find answers, but sometimes they are so disparate and so difficult to do. Is consolidating all that into one major platform. Does that have some real value in that
It's
space as well?
huge. It's huge. So we rep Dynamics 365. So the CRM, the ERP, the Office, Modern Workplace, it's all in the same cloud. So that data all flows and it's real time. And I think that's the big differentiator. And again, if it's not integrated, integrate it because you shouldn't be rekeying, and that way you have an expectation of real time data. But traditionally, businesses are looking in a rearview mirror. They're seeing data that's 45 to 60 days old to make decisions, and it's too late. You've already hit the wall, right? And so that connected world gives you real-time visibility to make decisions real time, and that has huge value. I mean, if you can see things, I can tell what my staff did yesterday. I can see it this morning. And so some people say, "Oh, I won't know for a month and a half." How can you make decisions? So the impact of more timely decision making is astronomical because we avert loss, we avert problems that could be occurring. So yeah, it is the connected model in most of the projects that I do. We integrate completely. There's not many manual. Even the payroll guys that are outside, that data flies right in. EDI, we're communicating between our suppliers. Somebody places an order on the website, it comes in, they get an acknowledgement. Again, those are examples of integration. Whether it's banking, I have somebody says, "Hey, the money hits the bank, we need to push it back out the same day." Well, that's just all banking automation. There's no hands in the middle. So as we get hands off, but the expectation, the accuracy of the data, right? It's real time. It's right now, and I think that's dramatic. And it didn't used to be like that for companies. And there's a lot of companies that still aren't like that, and they're hearing rearview mirror, and they're like, "Yep, that's my world." And so everybody aspires to have real time, intelligent insights that are actionable, right? Just summary. Oh, I can make decisions. I see red. I know I got to click on red. Oh, okay, now I can see the problem. But to have that real time insights, it's very powerful. And now if you throw artificial intelligence in there, where now you got somebody looking at that data other than you that's saying, "Hey, by the way, look what I found," and like, "Thank bot," and you got a bot in there now looking at data. You don't have to rely on a person. It's really accelerating the rate that decisions can be made.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting in that as well is that the organisations, as you say, there's still some organisations where lots of organisations where it may take them 1, 2, 3 weeks, a month, etc., to kind of get that information, and they may well look at that and go, "But we've always done that. That's just fine." Yeah, and maybe it is. However, you shouldn't underestimate that a whole bunch of your competitors are getting that information right now, and that's making them more competitive. And so I suppose if people listening to this thinking, "Well, I don't need to transform," it feels to me like, yeah, you probably at least need to go and ask and have a look at what could some kind of transformation project mean to you. So, there I go. I'm touting for trade for turnkey there. I think.
Well, it's
So,
it's true. Is what could be the impact? And there's companies that are lifestyle where they're like, everything's good. I'm not trying to grow. And there's other companies that we had a tagline, empowering competitive advantage, and it's so true that how do you compete? If you had lousy tennis shoes, you can't run as fast. Well, I got the sneakers, and and that's not it's not detrimental. And so if you think about eliminating these things that are detrimental to the business, old technology can be that. The lack of tools, it's like use the wrong tool to do the job, and it's just an efficiency thing. So great points.
well, Chris, before we end here, if people do want to follow up with you or find out more about turnkey, what's a good way to do that?
The easiest way is to go to the website, turnkeytech.com, turnkeytec.com. Again, we've got live chat. You show up on the site, someone will grab you. You want to talk to me? Just tell them, "Hey, I want to talk to Chris and find out how he can help me with the business." But yeah, go to the website. Tons of resources out there. And like I said, we'd love to get connected. So
Okay, well, Chris, look, thank you. I think that's a fascinating chat. I feel we've covered loads, and yet subsequently not really covered much because there's so much more that we could have talked about. So, but I think for people, and certainly for me, somebody who doesn't get involved in this world all of the time, I think I've learned lots. So hopefully those listening and watching have earned equally from it as I have. So for Chris, look, thanks for being on Tech Interviews. Really appreciate your
appreciate
time,
it.
and look
Thank you.
forward to having you again sometime in the future. Thanks again,
I
Chris.
would love to join you. Thank you again.
I hope you enjoyed that. For show notes, pop over to techstringy.com. We'll also find all of our previous Tech Interviews episodes. And if you've got an idea for a show I'd like to propose guests, then why not email me at podcast@techstringy.com. If you want to make sure to catch the next episode of Tech Interviews, then why not subscribe? You can subscribe right here on YouTube, or for the audio version of the show, subscribe in all good homes of podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Spotify. So until next time, thanks for watching.